Chapter 1: Granite Greetings. Rain slicked the asphalt of County Road 7, turning the gray ribbon black under the bruised November sky. Detective Kiera Marin guided her department-issued sedan around another pothole, the suspension groaning in protest. Trees, skeletal and dripping, crowded the roadside, their branches clawing at the heavy air. This far out, houses were infrequent, separated by wide tracts of sodden farmland and dense woods. She squinted, spotting the flashing blue and red lights painting the mist ahead. Two patrol cars and a vehicle marked with the county sheriff's insignia blocked the entrance to a narrow, unpaved lane, almost swallowed by overgrown vegetation. Marin pulled onto the muddy shoulder behind the sheriff's vehicle, the tires sinking slightly. She cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the patter of rain on the roof. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her satchel from the passenger seat and pushed the door open, stepping out into the chill. The air smelled of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. Her stomach gave a slight lurch. Sheriff Marcus Cole stood near the tape line, a bulky figure in a tan uniform straining at the seams. His arms were crossed over his chest, his expression pinched as he surveyed the scene beyond the tape. A small, dilapidated clapboard house barely visible through the trees at the end of the lane. A deputy stood beside him, young, pale, holding a large umbrella over the sheriff's head. "Detective Marin," Cole grunted as she approached, not bothering to turn his head fully. His voice was rough like gravel shifting. "Took your time." "Traffic heading out of Oakhaven was thick," Marin replied, her tone even. She ignored the umbrella, letting the cold rain trace paths down her face. It helped sharpen her focus. "What have we got, Sheriff?" Cole finally looked at her, his eyes small and assessing in his broad face. "Got a mess, is what? Local woman, Martha Gable, lived alone out here. Neighbor hadn't seen her in a couple days, came to check. Found the front door unlocked." He gestured vaguely towards the hidden house. "Found her inside, or parts of her." Marin nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Parts." "Yeah," Cole shifted his weight. "It ain't pretty, Marin. Forensics is inside now. Place is strange." "Strange how?" The sheriff chewed the inside of his cheek. "The house itself. You'll see. This ain't your usual domestic gone wrong. Something real twisted happened here." Marin ducked under the yellow tape, her boots squelching in the mud of the lane. The path was barely wide enough for a vehicle, flanked by dense thickets of thorny bushes and skeletal trees. Water pooled in deep ruts. As she walked, another structure came into view through a gap in the trees, sitting squat and ominous on a slight rise about 50 yards away from the victim's house. It was larger, built entirely of stone, rough-hewn blocks of varying shapes and sizes, gray and streaked with darker patches that looked like mold or weathering. Even from this distance, under the oppressive sky, it radiated a peculiar stillness, a brooding weight that seemed to absorb the light. It didn't look like any house she'd ever seen. It looked more like a mausoleum trying to disguise itself. "That place," Marin started, nodding towards the stone structure. "The Grimshaw House," Cole supplied, following her gaze. "Been empty for years. Locals avoid it. Place is built out of old gravestones, story goes." Marin stopped, turning to face him fully. "Gravestones." Yeah, salvaged from old cemeteries, derelict churchyards, God knows where. Old man Grimshaw built it himself back in the 50s. Died in it, too. Some say he bricked himself inside. Coal spat onto the muddy ground. Place gives me the creeps. Always has. She filed the information away. A house built of memorials to the dead, situated disturbingly close to a gruesome murder scene. Coincidence? Probably, but her instincts prickled. The victim's house was small, paint peeling from the wooden siding, the porch sagging. Two forensic technicians in white coveralls were working near the entrance. Marin showed her badge to the uniformed deputy standing guard at the door and stepped inside. The metallic smell was stronger here, thick and cloying. The interior was cramped and cluttered, filled with the accumulated possessions of a solitary life. Doilies covered every surface, porcelain figurines crowded shelves, faded floral wallpaper peeled near the ceiling. But the domestic scene was violently interrupted. A dark, wide stain soaked the threadbare carpet in the center of the small living room. Drag marks led towards the back of the house. Marin followed the marks into a narrow kitchen. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glare on the linoleum floor. Martha Gable lay near the back door. Or rather, what remained of her was arranged there. The sheriff hadn't exaggerated. It wasn't just a murder. It was a deliberate, grotesque tableau. The victim had been dismembered, the parts positioned with a chilling, almost artistic precision. One of the forensic techs, a woman with tired eyes named Sarah, looked up as Marin entered. "Detective, nasty one." "Talk me through it," Marin said, her voice low, keeping her expression neutral as she took in the horror. "Victim is Martha Gable, 67, Sarah began, pointing with a gloved hand. "Cause of death appears to be massive blunt force trauma to the head. Likely initial attack occurred in the living room based on the spatter and pool. Post-mortem. Well, you see it. Dismemberment seems precise, surgical almost, but done with something heavy, maybe an axe or cleaver. The arrangement." Sarah paused, gesturing towards the neatly aligned limbs and torso. "It's deliberate, almost ritualistic." Marin crouched, careful not to disturb anything, her gaze sweeping over the scene. Her eyes snagged on something tucked near the victim's severed hand. A small, weathered piece of stone, roughly rectangular, about the size of her palm. Dark lettering was carved into its surface. She pointed. "What's that?" Sarah leaned closer. "Found that when we first arrived. It wasn't here originally, according to the neighbor who found her. Looks like part of a marker. We bagged something similar near the initial impact site too." She indicated a sealed evidence bag on the counter containing another fragment, this one bearing only a few letters. Marin stared at the stone near the hand. The letters were worn, but legible in the harsh light. "It gone home." "Gone home," Marin murmured. "An epitaph fragment placed deliberately." She stood up, a cold knot forming in her gut. She thought of the house on the rise, the house built of gravestones. "Anything else?" Marin asked Sarah. "No forced entry. Killer might have known her or she let them in. Time of death, preliminary estimate, probably 48 to 72 hours ago. We're still processing." Marin thanked Sarah and walked slowly through the rest of the small house. Nothing else seemed overtly disturbed beyond the initial violence. No obvious robbery, just the brutal murder and the bizarre, staged aftermath, and the stone fragment, an epitaph. She stepped outside again, the rain having lessened to a persistent drizzle. Sheriff Cole was talking to the neighbor, a thin, anxious man wrapped in a blanket. Marin approached them. "Sheriff, that stone fragment found with the body." Cole nodded grimly. "Yeah, forensics found another piece in the living room. Looks like they came from the same marker." "It's an epitaph," Marin stated. "Gone home." The sheriff's eyes widened slightly. He glanced involuntarily towards the stone house on the rise, its gray mass silent and watchful through the trees. "Sweet mother, you don't think—" "I don't think anything yet," Marin cut him off. "But I want a team to check out that empty house, the Grimshaw place." Cole hesitated. "It's private property, Marin, been vacant decades, probably structurally unsound." "Get a warrant if you need to," Marin insisted, her voice hard. "Given the proximity, the nature of the construction materials, and this—" she gestured towards the victim's house, "this epitaph detail, we can't ignore it." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. All right. I'll get Ramirez to start the paperwork. But my deputies ain't thrilled about going near that place, warrant or no warrant." Marin looked past him, her gaze fixed on the stone house. It seemed darker now, the windows like empty sockets. Story goes it was built from gravestones, and the killer left an epitaph fragment with the victim. A message, a signature, or something else. "Who owns the Grimshaw property now?" she asked. "Some holding company out of state last I checked," Cole said. "Nobody locals claimed it in ages, except maybe Bren Croft. He runs the salvage yard over on Route 12. Claims old Grimshaw owed his granddad money, says the property's rightfully his. Keeps an eye on it unofficially. Chases off kids." "Bren Croft," Marin repeated, committing the name to memory. "Get me his details." "Will do." Cole looked uneasy. "You really think that pile of rocks has something to do with this?" "Martha Gable was arranged," Marin said quietly, the image vivid in her mind. "Like an exhibit. And the killer left a piece of a memorial stone, reading 'Gone Home.' If that house is built from memorials, Sheriff, then right now, it's the most interesting thing in this county." She turned away from the victim's small, violated home and stared hard at the Grimshaw house. The rain had stopped, but the air remained cold and heavy. The stone walls seemed to soak up the gloom, hoarding secrets within their borrowed markers. A house built of endings. And now, a new ending lay brutally displayed almost in its shadow, signed with a piece of the past. The investigation had just begun, but Marin felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp November air. It emanated from the stone house on the hill, a silent, granite greeting. Chapter 2: Walls of Remembrance. The warrant took less time than Kiera anticipated. Sheriff Cole, despite his unease, seemed motivated by the sheer brutality of Martha Gable's murder. By late afternoon, with the rain holding off but the sky remaining a sheet of solid gray, Marin found herself back on County Road 7, this time turning onto the narrow, overgrown lane leading directly to the Grimshaw house. Two deputies, Miller and Chen, waited in their cruiser, engine running, heater presumably blasting. They didn't look happy. Brennan Croft's salvage yard address and phone number were tucked into Marin's pocket. She planned to visit him after this. First, she needed to see the house up close, inside and out. She got out of her car, the air thick and still. The silence here was different from the quiet of the woods around Martha Gable's place. It was heavier, expectant. The Grimshaw house dominated the clearing, larger and more imposing up close. Cole hadn't been exaggerating. The walls were a bizarre mosaic of stone shapes and textures. Rough granite blocks jostled against smoother marble slabs, some clearly recognizable as headstones, their inscriptions weathered but still visible in places. Angels with broken wings, weeping willows carved in relief, names, dates, fragments of verse, all cemented together haphazardly, forming the structure's grim facade. Ivy crept up one corner like skeletal fingers. The windows were dark voids, some boarded up from the inside, others just empty black squares. "All right, detective," Deputy Miller said, climbing out of the cruiser, his hand resting near his sidearm. He was young, trying too hard to project authority. Chen, older and more stoic, followed him out, shotgun held loosely at his side. "Sheriff wants us to stick close. Place has a bad reputation." "Understood," Marin said. "Standard procedure. Check all entrances, clear the rooms. We're looking for any connection to the Gable homicide. Signs of recent entry, disturbance, anything that might suggest someone used this place as a base, or," she hesitated, "anything related to epitaphs or stone fragments." Chen nodded curtly. Miller just swallowed, his eyes scanning the house warily. They approached the front door, a heavy slab of dark, weathered wood set deep into the stone. There was no visible lock, just a heavy iron ring handle. Marin pulled on gloves. Chen tried the handle. It didn't budge. "Locked or stuck?" Marin asked. "Feels solid," Chen replied, testing it again. They circled the house, boots crunching on gravel and fallen leaves. The stonework was relentless, offering few handholds. Most ground floor windows were boarded tight. Around the side, however, they found one window where the boards had been partially pried away, leaving a gap wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Fresh splinters on the wood indicated recent activity. "This looks promising," Marin murmured. Miller shone his flashlight through the gap. "Looks dark, can't see much." "Chen, give Miller a boost. I'll follow," Marin instructed. Chen holstered his shotgun and laced his fingers together. Miller stepped into the improvised stirrup, grunting as Chen lifted him towards the opening. Miller wriggled through the gap and disappeared inside. A moment later, his muffled voice came back. "Clear just inside. Floor feels solid. Old furniture covered in dust sheets." Marin placed her hands on the sill. Chen gave her a steadying hand as she hoisted herself up and slid through the narrow opening, landing with a soft thud on the dusty floor inside. Miller helped her up, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The air inside was cold, stale, and carried a faint, dry scent: dust, decay, and something else, something mineral like damp stone after a rain. They were in what must have been a large living room. Shapes draped in white sheets stood like pale ghosts in the flashlight beams. Dust motes danced in the air. The walls, however, commanded immediate attention. Here the construction was starkly visible. Gravestones, large and small, formed the interior walls, the mortar between them thick and uneven. Names and dates faced inwards. Eleazar Croft, 1888-1941, beloved daughter Clara, aged 7, rest in peace, Thomas Ashton. It was like standing inside a crypt. God Almighty, Miller whispered, sweeping his light across the inscriptions. Focus, Miller, Marin said sharply, though she felt a similar unease crawl up her spine. Check the rest of this floor. Chen, secure the window and keep watch. Chen's acknowledgement came from outside. Marin unholstered her own flashlight, its beam adding to Miller's. They moved slowly through the downstairs rooms. A dining room with a heavy table shrouded in white. A kitchen frozen in time, with archaic appliances and thick cobwebs spanning the empty cupboards. Everywhere the walls were the same, a patchwork quilt of remembrance, stolen markers forming the bones of the house. Some stones were simple, others ornate, pieces of mausoleum facades incorporated near doorways or fireplaces. In the center of the main living room stood a massive fireplace, built from larger, more elaborate stone fragments, and set directly above the mantelpiece, serving as a grim keystone, was a single, large slab of polished black marble. Unlike the surrounding stones, its surface was smooth, almost reflective, and bore no inscription. It was this stone that drew Marin's eye. It seemed darker than the rest, absorbing the flashlight beams. And was it her imagination, or was the surface faintly damp, glistening slightly in the light? She reached out a gloved hand, hesitated, then touched the surface. It was cold, smooth, and undeniably slick with a thin film of clear, odorless moisture. Miller, see this. Miller directed his light onto the black marble. Yeah, what is it? It's wet, Marin said. No leaks in the ceiling here. None of the other stones feel damp. Miller touched it cautiously. Weird condensation. Doesn't seem like it, Marin said. It felt different, thicker than water. She made a mental note, the weeping keystone. That's what Cole's local lore might call it. They continued their search. Upstairs, bedrooms lay empty save for dust and cobwebs. More stone walls whispered names of the long dead. There was no sign of recent habitation, no squatter's nest, no hidden supplies. But in one small back room, overlooking the woods behind the house, they found something else. Scratched crudely into the dusty floorboards as if with a nail or a sharp stone were words. Fragments. Sleps below. Until he comes. And pay the toll. Marin crouched, examining the scratches. They looked relatively fresh compared to the thick layer of dust elsewhere. Someone was here, she said. Someone who knew about the epitaphs. Killer? Miller asked, his voice hushed. Or just local kids spooking themselves, Marin countered, though she didn't believe it. The Gable murder, the epitaph fragment, this house, these scratches, the pieces were starting to connect in a disturbing pattern. They completed their sweep without finding anything else concrete. No murder weapon, no stash of tools, no personal belongings suggesting an inhabitant. Just the oppressive atmosphere, the stone faces of the dead, the damp keystone, and the cryptic scratches on the floor. Back outside, the gray sky was deepening towards dusk. Marin briefed Chen. instructing him and Miller to maintain a perimeter until relieved, keep a log of anyone approaching. She needed to talk to Brennan Croft. Croft's salvage and restoration was located 10 miles away, a sprawling acreage of rusted metal, discarded machinery, and decaying architectural elements presided over by a large, corrugated iron warehouse. A hand-painted sign, faded and peeling, marked the entrance. Marin parked near the warehouse office, a small structure bolted onto the side of the main building. The man who emerged from the office door looked like he belonged amongst the salvage. Tall and wiry, probably in his late 50s, Bren Croft had a face etched with lines that spoke of outdoor work and worry. His gray hair was tied back in a short ponytail, and his flannel shirt was grease-stained. He wiped his hands on a rag as Marin approached, his eyes sharp and guarded. "Help you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, not unlike Sheriff Cole. "Detective Marin, County Sheriff's Department," she said, showing her badge. "I need to ask you a few questions about the Gravestone House." Croft's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He stuffed the rag into his back pocket. Figured someone might come asking after Martha. He gestured towards a rickety wooden chair near the office door. "Have a seat, detective." Marin remained standing. "You know the property well." "Know it," Croft gave a short, humorless laugh. "My granddad helped Eleazar Grimshaw build the damn thing, hauled stone for him. Never got paid his due, neither. Been keeping an eye on the place since it went vacant. Someone has too. Sheriff Cole mentioned you supplied some of the stone." Marin watched his reaction closely. Croft's gaze shifted, avoiding hers. He picked at a loose thread on his shirt cuff. "Some. Grimshaw sourced most of it himself. God knows where he got the markers from. Some derelict plots way out county, churchyard clearances people wanted forgotten. I was just a kid, helped Granddad load the truck sometimes. He had a small stone-cutting business on the side back then. Grimshaw paid pennies for broken pieces, rejects." He finally met her eyes, a defiant glint in them. "We didn't steal headstones, detective, if that's what you're asking. Just salvage." "Did you know Grimshaw well?" Nobody knew Grimshaw well, kept to himself. Folks thought he was touched in the head even before he started building that monument. Croft shook his head. "Said he was building a place the past couldn't escape, a permanent place for memories." Memories. His words, not mine, or something like that. He was obsessed with endings. What was written down, said the stones held echoes. Croft's voice dropped lower. "Granddad thought he was dangerous, told me to stay clear." "Echoes," Marin repeated. The word resonated uncomfortably with the epitaph fragment left with Martha Gable. "Mr. Croft, we found Martha Gable was posed, and a fragment of stone, an epitaph, was left with her body. Gone home." Croft went pale under his weathered tan. He leaned against the corrugated wall, suddenly looking older. "Sweet Jesus, it's starting." "What's starting?" Marin pressed. He looked around the cluttered yard as if checking for eavesdroppers before turning back to her, his eyes wide with a fear that looked genuine. "The house. Grimshaw wasn't just building a house, detective. He was building a prison, or maybe a battery powered by sorrow. He used specific stones, arranged them just so, said it focused the echoes. He thought he could control it." Croft swallowed hard. "He couldn't. It controlled him. drove him mad, found him bricked up in the pantry, remember? And that black stone over the fireplace, the blank one. The weeping keystone, Marin supplied, testing the name. Croft flinched. Don't call it that, it reacts to strong emotions, grief, fear, violence. Grimshaw said it was the heart, it weeps when the house feeds. A cold dread, far deeper than the evening chill, settled over Marin. A house built to contain sorrow, powered by death, with a heart that weeps before it feeds, and a killer arranging victims according to epitaphs stolen from its very walls. Feeds on what, Mr. Croft? Marin asked, her voice barely a whisper. Bren Croft looked towards the setting sun, towards the direction of the stone house hidden miles away. On endings, detective. It collects them. Chapter 3, Sorrow's Echo. Days bled into a week. The investigation crawled. Forensics confirmed the epitaph fragments found at the gable scene came from a type of granite common in older local cemeteries, consistent with stones used in the Grimshaw house, but couldn't pinpoint an exact match among the visible exterior or interior markers. There were simply too many, and accessing every single one was impossible without partial demolition. The scratches on the floor inside the house yielded no usable prints, only more unsettling ambiguity. Sheriff Cole grew impatient, pressing for conventional leads, suspects with motives related to Martha Gable, disgruntled neighbors, distant relatives. None materialized. Martha had lived a quiet, solitary life. Marin felt the sheriff's skepticism about her focus on the Grimshaw house hardening into outright resistance. He assigned Miller and Chen to monitor the property from the road, more a token gesture than active surveillance. Marin spent hours reviewing the case files, the crime scene photos, Croft's unnerving statements. A prison, a battery powered by sorrow. It collects endings. The words echoed Bren Croft's fear, a fear that felt disturbingly resonant within the stone walls Marin had walked. She couldn't shake the image of the weeping keystone, its cold, damp surface. She needed more context, more history. Following a suggestion from Cole, delivered with a dismissive wave, she sought out Dr. Alwyn Finch, the town's unofficial historian and folklorist. Finch lived in a cluttered Victorian house in Oak Haven's small historic district, surrounded by teetering stacks of books and yellowing maps. He was a small, bird-like man with bright, inquisitive eyes behind thick spectacles. He listened intently as Marin, omitting the grisly details of the murder itself, explained her interest in the Grimshaw house and its peculiar construction. "Ah, the stone house," Finch chirped, his eyes lighting up. "A fascinating anomaly. Built by Eleazar Grimshaw, you know, quite the eccentric, came here in the late 40s, bought that parcel cheap. Folks said he was running from something." Finch scurried over to a bookshelf overflowing with binders. His methods were unorthodox, caused quite a stir, using grave markers. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound scrapbook. "I have some contemporary newspaper clippings somewhere." He flipped through pages filled with brittle, brown articles. Here we are. Oak Haven Weekly Ledger, 1952. Concerns raised over morbid materials used in county construction. He faced opposition, lawsuits even, mostly from families whose ancestral plots he allegedly disturbed. Nothing ever stuck, though. He was cunning. Finch tapped a paragraph. Grimshaw argued he was preserving history, giving forgotten names a new permanence. Twisted logic, of course. Most believed he was simply mad. There were darker whispers, too, naturally. Talk of rituals, attempts to commune with the dead whose names formed his walls. Rituals, Marin leaned forward. Folklore detective, Finch said, adjusting his glasses. Stories passed down, sacrifices, attempts to draw power from the collective grief embedded in the stones. Grimshaw became a recluse, rarely seen. Then one day he simply wasn't. Found walled up inside his own creation, wasn't he? The official verdict was accidental self-entombment during renovations, but speculation ran wild. Did he leave any journals, records? Marin asked. Finch sighed. If he did, they vanished. The house was sealed by the county, eventually sold off cheap to settle debts, passed through several absentee owners since. No one stays long, reports of unsettling occurrences, strange noises, feelings of oppressive sadness, items moving. He lowered his voice. Some say the house actively resists occupants. Marin thought of the weeping keystone, the scratches. Were there ever specific threats, patterns? Mostly vague unease, Finch admitted. Though there was a period in the 70s, a family named Peterson tried living there. Their youngest daughter, she started talking about stone friends who whispered secrets. They left abruptly after a series of escalating accidents. Finch shivered slightly, despite the warmth of the cluttered room. Never heard what became of them. Marin left Finch's house with more folklore than facts, yet the consistent thread of unease of the house having a malevolent character strengthened her conviction. The killer wasn't just using the house as a lair. They were interacting with it, interpreting its history, its very fabric. Her phone buzzed. It was the sheriff's office dispatch. Another call, not a homicide but a disturbance, reported by Bryn Croft, near the Grimshaw house. Marin drove fast, pushing the sedan harder than she should on the damp roads. Pulling onto County Road 7, she saw Croft's battered pickup truck parked haphazardly near the lane leading to the stone house. Croft himself stood beside it, arguing heatedly with deputies Miller and Chen, who looked bored and irritated. "What's going on?" Marin asked, approaching the group. "Detective." Croft turned, relief washing over his face, quickly replaced by anger directed at the deputies. "Told these two someone was snooping around the house. Saw flashlight beams through the trees from my place just after dusk. Came over, found fresh tracks near that broken window they used last time. These jokers say they saw nothing." "We maintained observation, detective," Miller said stiffly. "No vehicles approached. No one passed us on the road." "They could have come through the woods," Croft insisted, jabbing a finger towards the dense tree line opposite the lane. "We checked the perimeter an hour ago. Nothing," Chen added, his voice flat. Marin looked from Croft's agitated face to the deputy's impassive ones. Croft seemed genuinely disturbed. The deputies seemed content to log hours. "Show me the tracks," she said to Croft. He led her down the muddy lane towards the Grimshaw house, which loomed silently in the twilight. Near the boarded-up window with the pried-off plank, Croft pointed to the damp earth. Several distinct boot prints, partially obscured by fallen leaves but clearly visible, led from the edge of the woods towards the window. They were different from her own prints or those of the deputies from their initial entry. "See," Croft demanded. "Someone was here." Marin crouched, examining the prints. Standard work boot tread, medium size. Nothing immediately distinctive, but someone had been here recently. Someone who knew how to avoid the road surveillance. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream cut through the evening air. It came from the direction of Oakhaven, several miles away, but carried with unnatural clarity on the still air. It wasn't a scream of pain, but pure, unadulterated terror. It rose, held, then abruptly stopped, leaving a ringing silence. Everyone froze. Even Miller and Chen looked unnerved now. "What in God's name was that?" Miller whispered. Marin's blood ran cold. She looked at the Grimshaw house, its dark windows like watching eyes. Then she looked at Croft, whose face was ashen. "It's happened again," Croft breathed, his voice trembling. "The house, it knows." Marin's radio crackled to life. "Dispatch. Urgent tone. All units, report of a possible 187 at the Oakhaven Municipal Cemetery. Groundskeeper found unresponsive, requesting immediate backup and medical." Oakhaven Municipal Cemetery, where countless headstones stood sentinel. Marin sprinted towards her car, Croft and the deputies following. The image of the weeping keystone, cold, black, and possibly weeping again, burning in her mind. The killer wasn't just interpreting epitaphs. They were collecting them. Chapter 4: Epitaphs in Earnest. The Oakhaven Municipal Cemetery sprawled across a low hill overlooking the town, rows upon rows of granite and marble markers standing stark against the dying light. Police cruisers angled haphazardly near the main gate, their lights painting the tombstones in flashing strokes of red and blue. Marin pushed through the small crowd of onlookers, mostly cemetery workers and frightened residents drawn by the commotion. Sheriff Cole stood near a large, ornate mausoleum, his face grim. The victim was Silas Croft, the cemetery groundskeeper, and Bren Croft's cousin. Bren arrived moments after Marin, his face tight with disbelief and dawning horror as Cole confirmed the identity. Silas lay sprawled on the gravel path near the mausoleum's entrance, his head crushed by a heavy, blunt object. Unlike Martha Gable, there was no dismemberment, no elaborate staging, just brutal, efficient violence. But tucked into the collar of Silas's work jacket, placed with chilling deliberation, was another stone fragment. Smaller this time, weathered gray marble. Marin knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene being processed by forensics. The inscription was faint but legible. "At rest." "Second one," Cole muttered, standing over her shoulder. "Same M.O., blunt force, post-mortem placement of the stone." He looked less skeptical now, more deeply troubled. "Silas was a good man, worked here 30 years. Bren Croft made a choked sound, turning away, supported by Deputy Chen. Marin stood up, surveying the surroundings. The mausoleum belonged to the Ashton family, one of the town's founding lines. An elaborate stone structure, gray and imposing. Why here? Why Silas? Was there a connection between Silas Croft and the Ashtons, or was the location itself significant? "Check the Ashton mausoleum," Marin instructed the nearest forensic tech. "Dust for prints, check for any disturbance inside." She walked over to Bren, who was leaning heavily against a patrol car. "Bren, I'm sorry about Silas. Did he have any connection to the Ashtons? Any reason someone would target him here?" Bren shook his head, his eyes vacant with shock. "Number Silas. He just worked here, kept the grounds. Knew everyone buried here, knew their stories, the Ashtons. Old family, died out years ago. Why would anyone?" His voice trailed off. He looked towards the dark bulk of the Grimshaw house, miles away but a palpable presence in his mind. "The house," he whispered. "It's reaching out." Marin spent the next hour coordinating with forensics, interviewing the shaken employees who found Silas, searching the immediate area for the murder weapon or discarded clues. Nothing. The killer was meticulous, leaving only the victim and the cryptic stone signature. Later, back at the small station in Oakhaven, Marin pinned crime scene photos of both victims side by side on a corkboard. Martha Gable, arranged like a broken doll in her kitchen, marked GONE home. Silas Croft, struck down amidst the resting places of others, marked AT rest. The epitaphs seemed chillingly appropriate, almost like captions. She pulled out the notes from her visit to the Grimshaw house. The scratched words on the floor: "Sleeps below, till he comes. Pay the toll." Fragments like the killer's calling cards. Was the killer following instructions, or creating their own dark narrative using the house as inspiration? She focused on the vessel concept. If the killer was influenced, possessed even by the house or the entities Grimshaw supposedly trapped within its walls, their actions might not be entirely rational or planned in a conventional sense. They might be driven by urges, whispers, fragmented visions tied to specific stones, specific names, specific epitaphs. Who had access? Who knew the house? Bren Croft, obviously, but his grief over Silas seemed genuine, raw. The deputies, unlikely. Local kids. The brutality suggested something more than adolescent mischief. Someone new, someone drawn to the house's reputation. Her thoughts kept circling back to the weeping keystone, the black, inscrutable heart of the house. Bren claimed it wept when the house fed. Was it weeping now? She felt an irrational urge to drive out there to see for herself. Instead, she pulled up property records for the Grimshaw house again. Still owned by an anonymous holding company based in Delaware. She initiated a request to trace the ownership further, but knew it could take days, even weeks. She needed to understand the vessel. What would it feel like? A compulsion, hearing voices, seeing things. She decided to revisit Bren Croft, not at the salvage yard but at his home. He might be more forthcoming away from the memories of his grandfather and the salvaged stones. Bren lived in a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Oakhaven. Lights were on, but he took a long time answering the door. His eyes were red-rimmed, his movements sluggish. He let Marin in without a word, retreating to an armchair in the small living room, sinking into it like a puppet with cut strings. "How are you holding up?" Marin asked gently, remaining standing. Bren stared at the floor. Silas, he was family, quiet man, wouldn't hurt a fly. He looked up, his gaze locking with Marin, filled with a desperate certainty. It was the house, detective. I know it sounds crazy, but it uses people. It twists them. How, Bren? How does it do it? He ran a hand through his thinning hair. I don't know for sure, Grandad hinted. Grimshaw believed the stones weren't just markers, they were anchors. Anchors for the sorrow, the pain, the unfinished business of the people named on them. He thought he could harness it, but it was too much. It leaks out, finds cracks, finds receptive minds. Receptive minds. People in pain, Bren said, his voice cracking. People grieving, people angry, people, like me maybe, guilty. He confessed then, the words tumbling out, how his grandfather hadn't just salvaged broken pieces but had occasionally taken whole, smaller markers from neglected sections of old cemeteries at Grimshaw's urging for extra money. Stones Grimshaw specifically requested. He knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong even as a boy. We needed the money. Does anyone else know this? Marin asked. No, Grandad died years ago, took it to his grave, until now. Marin considered this. Croft had motive for guilt, proximity, knowledge, but his reaction to Silas's death. She decided to push him on the vessel idea. Could someone be influenced, controlled? Bren nodded slowly. I think so, maybe not all the time. Maybe it comes and goes, whispers, urges, seeing things that ain't there. Grandad used to say after working up at the house, sometimes he'd hear voices calling names, names from the stones. Marin felt a chill despite the stuffy room. What about the epitaphs? Why leave those specific fragments? Maybe they aren't just signatures, Bren whispered, leaning forward, his eyes wide. Maybe they're instructions for the next one, or maybe they're pieces of a key. A key to what? I don't know. Grimshaw was obsessed with what came after. Maybe he thought he could build a door. Before Marin could press further, her phone rang again. It was Deputy Chen, his voice tight with urgency. Detective Marin, you need to get out here, to the Grimshaw house. What is it, Chen? Did you see someone? No, ma'am, it's the house itself. The big black stone over the fireplace, the one you pointed out. The keystone, what about it? Marin gripped the phone tighter. It's not just damp anymore, ma'am, Chen stammered, the sound of wind whistling faintly in the background. It's bleeding. Chapter 5, Invitation in Stone. Night had fully fallen by the time Marin reached the Grimshaw house again, Bren Croft riding shotgun, his face a mask of dread. The wind had picked up, howling through the skeletal trees, making the lane feel even more claustrophobic. Deputies Miller and Chen stood near their cruiser, flashlights trained on the house, their usual apathy replaced by raw fear. You weren't kidding, Marin said, stepping out into the wind and getting her first clear look. Chen hadn't exaggerated. From the base of the large black weeping keystone above the main fireplace, visible even through the dusty downstairs window they'd entered before, trickled a thick, dark, viscous substance. It wasn't blood red, but a deep, opaque black, like crude oil or ink. It oozed slowly down the face of the keystone and dripped onto the hearth below, forming a small, glistening pool. Called the sheriff, Miller said, his voice strained. He's on his way, said not to go inside until he gets here. We can't wait, Marin stated, her gaze fixed on the black ooze. Something felt different tonight. The air vibrated with a low hum almost below the threshold of hearing. The house felt awake. The killer might still be nearby or inside. Bren Croft stared at the weeping stone, mesmerized and horrified. It's never done that before, not like this, so much. Chen Miller, cover the exits, Marin ordered, pulling her service weapon. Radio if anything changes out here. Bren, stay with them. No, Bren said, shaking his head, his eyes still locked on the house. My family, Sela's, Granddad, it's tied to this place. I'm going in. He produced a heavy wrench from the pocket of his jacket, gripping it tightly. Marin hesitated, then nodded. Croft knew the house, its history. He might see something she wouldn't. Stay behind me. No heroics. They approached the side window again. The plank was still pried loose. Marin shone her light inside. The black pool on the hearth seemed larger now, glistening obscenely in the beam. The air drifting out smelled faintly of ozone and damp earth, overlaid with a new, unpleasant metallic tang. Marin slipped through the opening, Bren following clumsily, wrench held ready. Inside, the silence pressed in, broken only by the wind moaning outside and a faint, rhythmic dripping sound, the black ichor striking the hearthstone. The hum she'd sensed outside was stronger here, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. Flashlight beams swept the main room. Dust sheets still covered the furniture like burial shrouds. The epitaphs carved into the walls seemed sharper, more defined in the stark light. Eleazar Croft, beloved daughter Clara Thomas Ashton. Names upon names, watching silently. They moved towards the fireplace. The black substance was thick, almost gelatinous and utterly black, absorbing the light. It didn't smell like blood or oil. It smelled old, like deep, undisturbed earth and something else. Regret. What is that stuff? Bren whispered, keeping his distance. I don't know, Marin replied. Evidence. She scanned the room again. Nothing seemed disturbed since their last visit, except for the weeping. Suddenly, a scraping sound echoed from upstairs. Stone on stone. Marin raised her weapon, signaling Bren to stay put. She moved towards the staircase, her footsteps loud on the dusty wooden treads. The hum intensified as she ascended. The upstairs landing was dark, the doors to the bedrooms gaping black squares. Another scrape, louder this time, came from the small back room where they'd found the scratched messages on the floor. Marin advanced cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, weapon held ready. She reached the doorway. The room was empty. The scratched messages were still there on the floorboards, but on the wall opposite the window, a section of gravestone plaster seemed loose. A fine crack ran down its center and dust sifted down onto the floor. As she watched, a small chunk of mortar near the top edge crumbled away. A scrape. The sound came from inside the wall. Marin backed away slowly, her heart pounding. Was someone bricked up inside like Grimshaw, or was it something else? The house settling. Rats. It didn't sound like rats. She retreated downstairs. Bren was still near the fireplace, staring at the weeping keystone, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" Marin asked quietly. Bren nodded, his eyes wide. "Sounds like digging." Before Marin could respond, a loud crash came from the front of the house. They spun around. The heavy front door, the one Chen couldn't budge earlier, had been thrown inwards, splintering the frame. Standing silhouetted against the flashing police lights outside was a figure. Tall, gaunt, dressed in dark, practical clothing smeared with dirt and something darker. They held a heavy, short-handled sledgehammer loosely at their side. Their face was obscured by shadows and a knit cap pulled low, but their eyes seemed to burn with a fanatical light. It wasn't aggression Marin saw, but a kind of rapturous purpose. "You shouldn't be here," the figure said, their voice surprisingly soft, yet carrying over the wind and the hum. It held a strange, flat quality as if filtered through layers of static. "The house is preparing. It's time for the final inscription." The vessel, Marin raised her weapon. "Drop the hammer, put your hands where I can see them." The figure ignored her, taking a step inside. Their eyes flickered towards the weeping keystone, then to Bren Croft. A flicker of recognition or calculation crossed their features. "Croft," the figure murmured. The name sounded like both a statement and a question. "Who are you?" Bren demanded, raising the wrench. "What do you want?" "I am the scribe," the figure replied, their voice gaining a slight resonance as if harmonizing with the hum of the house. "I listen, I obey, I complete the collection." They took another step, sledgehammer swinging slightly. "The stones speak. They demand balance, an ending for every beginning stolen." Marin saw the figure's gaze drift towards a specific section of the wall near the door, a collection of smaller, simpler stones. Their eyes fixed on one in particular. Eleazar Croft, 1880-81941. Bren's grandfather. "You killed Martha Gable," Marin said, trying to keep the figure focused on her. "You killed Silas Croft." "They were openings," the scribe said dismissively. "They're epitaphs, signposts, simple sentiments for simple lives, necessary transitions, but the house requires a foundation stone, one who understands the debt." Their burning gaze fixed on Bren again. "A Croft began this. A Croft must consecrate the end." The scribe suddenly lunged, not at Marin, but at Bren, the sledgehammer raised high. Bren stumbled backwards, swinging the wrench wildly. Marin fired her weapon. The shot echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. The scribe staggered, clutching their shoulder where the bullet hit, but didn't fall. They seemed fueled by something beyond normal endurance. "The house protects its instrument," the scribe hissed, pain and fervor mingling in their voice. They swung the hammer again, a low, sweeping blow aimed at Bren's legs. Bren cried out, falling heavily as the hammer connected with his knee. Marin fired again, aiming center mass. The scribe buckled, dropping the hammer with a clang, stumbling towards the wall bearing Eleazar Croft's marker. They clawed at the stone, fingers scrabbling for purchase, leaving dark smears from their wounded shoulder. "No, almost, complete," the scribe gasped, their body slumping down against the wall of names. Outside, sirens grew louder. Sheriff Cole and more deputies were arriving. Marin kept her weapon trained on the downed figure, moving cautiously towards Bren, who lay groaning on the floor, clutching his shattered knee. The hum in the room began to fade. The dripping from the weeping keystone slowed, the black ichor congealing on the hearth. Marin risked a glance at the keystone. Was it her imagination, or did the black surface seem duller now, less slick? She reached the scribe. Pulling off the knit cap revealed a face surprisingly young, unfamiliar, eyes wide and now rapidly losing focus, but still holding a trace of that fanatical gleam. Male, late 20s maybe. No one Marin recognized from town. A drifter. Someone drawn here specifically. Why? Marin knelt beside him, ignoring the spreading stain on his chest. Why do this? The scribe's lips moved, a faint whisper escaping. The walls, told me, needed one more stone. Their eyes rolled back. Sheriff Cole burst in, weapon drawn, followed by deputies. They took in the scene, Marin standing over the dying scribe, Bren injured on the floor, the dropped sledgehammer, the weeping keystone finally still. Marin, what the hell happened? Cole demanded. He called himself the scribe, Marin said, holstering her weapon as paramedics rushed towards Bren. Said the house told him to do it, said he needed one more stone. She looked at the wall where the scribe had fallen, at the marker for Eleazar Croft. Then she looked at Bren being carefully lifted onto a stretcher. A Croft began it. A Croft must consecrate the end. The scribe had failed, or had merely been interrupted. The house stood silent now, the oppressive hum gone. But the chill remained, deeper than ever. The collection wasn't complete. Chapter 6, Unwritten. The aftermath was messy, tangled in procedure, and the persistent, unsettling questions the Grimshaw house refused to answer. The scribe died before he could be identified or formally questioned, succumbing to his injuries en route to the hospital. He carried no identification. His fingerprints yielded no matches in any database. He was a ghost, an instrument seemingly manifested solely for the house's grim purpose. His motives, beyond the fragmented pronouncements Marin and Bren heard, remained locked away. Bren Croft survived, his knee requiring extensive surgery. He recovered slowly, physically scarred and psychologically burdened by the knowledge of his family's connection to the house's origins and the violence it had spawned. He spoke little about the events of that night, retreating into himself. The weight of the debt, the scribe mentioned, settling heavily upon him. Sheriff Cole, faced with 2 homicides and the death of the apparent perpetrator, officially closed the Epitaph killer case. The narrative presented to the public was simpler. A disturbed transient, likely squatting in the abandoned Grimshaw house, suffered delusions possibly exacerbated by the house's morbid history, leading to the murders of Martha Gable and Silas Croft before being fatally wounded while attacking Brennan Croft and resisting arrest. It was neat, plausible, and omitted the weeping stones, the specific epitaphs, the palpable sense of malevolence Marin had experienced. Marin didn't contest the official report. How could she articulate the hum in the walls, the chilling intent behind the scribe's words, the feeling that the house itself was a character in the tragedy? She filed her supplemental reports, detailing Bren Croft's testimony, the state of the weeping keystone, the scratches on the floor, sticking to observable facts but knowing they only skirted the deeper, colder truth. Weeks turned into months. Winter relinquished its grip, but a chill lingered around the Grimshaw house. The county boarded it up more securely this time, reinforcing the windows and the damaged front door. Yet, stories persisted. Locals claim to see lights flickering in the empty windows on moonless nights, or hear faint, discordant music carried on the wind. Patchwork Pete, the homeless man Marin had briefly considered early on, swore he saw figures moving behind the upstairs windows, figures made of stone and shadow. His claims were dismissed. Marin requested a transfer back to the city. Oakhaven County, with its secrets buried under farmland and cemented into the walls of a house built from sorrow, felt suffocating. Her last visit was to Bryn Croft. He was back at the salvage yard, walking with a pronounced limp, his face etched with a permanent weariness. "Leaving us, detective?" he asked, leaning against a stack of salvaged bricks. "Time for a change," Marin replied. "How are you doing, Bryn?" He shrugged, looking out over his kingdom of rust and decay. "Getting by, the leg aches when it rains." He paused. "They boarded it up tight, you know, the house." "I know." "Doesn't matter," Bryn said quietly. "You can board up windows, doors, but you can't board up memories. You can't wall up grief." He looked at Marin, his eyes holding a bleak understanding. "It's still waiting, collecting. It didn't get the final stone it wanted that night." Marin didn't reply. There was nothing to say. He was right. On her way out of the county for the last time, she drove slowly past the turnoff for County Road 7. She didn't stop, didn't look down the overgrown lane, but she felt it. The presence of the Grimshaw house, squatting on its rise, a silent monument to stolen endings, built from gravestones imbued with sorrow, waiting patiently. The scribe was gone, but the house remained. The story felt unfinished, the final epitaph unwritten. The collection wasn't complete. And somewhere, perhaps drawn by whispers only the desperate could hear, another vessel might be found, another scribe ready to listen to the walls. The end.